The silence was the first insult. It wasn't the silence of space, that vast, cold emptiness that humanity had learned to navigate with a certain reverence. This was a manufactured quiet, a deliberate and suffocating hush imposed by the Galactic Concordance. They called it the period of harmonious integration, a century-long probationary term for Earth, the cosmic equivalent of a child being told to sit still at the adult's table. Humanity, with its turbulent history and its raw, unpolished ambition, was a novelty to the ancient species that glided through the star lanes in ships of spun light and crystalline thought. We were loud, we were messy, and so we were silenced. Our comms were throttled. Our expansion was caged to the Sol system, and our technology was guided by the serene, towering figures of the Ethel, the self-appointed shepherds of the galaxy. They gave us medicine that cured our oldest plagues and energy systems that healed our poisoned skies. But the price was our voice. We were to listen, to learn, and to be grateful. For a time, most of us were. The peace was intoxicating after centuries of self-inflicted wounds. We mistook patronage for partnership and condescension for concern. The second insult came from Triton. Neptune's largest moon had been gifted to the Silicim, a species of silicon-based architects, as a canvas for their next great work. The Concordance had decreed that Triton's nitrogen ice plains would be sculpted into a monolith of galactic unity, a monument to their own benevolent rule. No one asked humanity. Our ancestral claim to the worlds within our own solar system was deemed a quaint, primitive notion. Ambassador Kalen Reed, a man whose spine was forged from equal parts optimism and steel, had lodged the formal protest. He stood in the orb of consensus on Cygnus X1, a lone, fleshy figure amidst beings of light, gas, and sculpted stone, and spoke of heritage, of proximity, of respect. The response was a wave of what the Concordance translated as amused pity. The Ethel Praetor, a being whose form shimmered like a heat haze, explained with infinite patience that the monument would bring prestige to our local cluster. Kalen's protest was noted, archived, and ignored. The Silicim drills, vast machines that sang in frequencies that made human teeth ache, landed on Triton a week later. They began to carve, not just into the ice, but into the pride of a species that was slowly realizing its gilded cage was still a cage. Dr. Alara Vance watched the carving from her clandestine observatory on Io, a sulfur-stained rock she'd chosen for its cosmic background noise and its blessed distance from Concordance oversight. She wasn't an astronomer anymore. Not officially. The Concordance had deemed her field of study, theoretical gravimetrics, unstable and redundant. They had their own perfect science of the universe, and Alara's messy equations, her theories of gravitational echoes and subspace resonance, were disruptive. So she was retired, given a generous pension and a quiet dismissal. But Alara never stopped working. She had repurposed an old deep-core mining sensor array, linking it to a network of rogue quantum computers she'd built herself, and she watched the universe in a way the Concordance had forbidden. She saw the stress fractures in space-time they papered over, the subtle dissonances their perfect energy systems created, and she was watching Triton not for the monument, but for the hum. The Silicim drills weren't just drills, they were resonance engines, using focused gravitational waves to fracture the nitrogen ice with surgical precision. It was brutally efficient, elegant, and according to Alara's calculations, catastrophically dangerous. She had sent her warnings through every back channel she knew. She'd flagged the resonance frequencies as being dangerously close to the subspace harmonic of Neptune itself. Pinging a gas giant with that kind of focused gravity she wrote, was like tapping a tuning fork next to a mountain of glass. Kaylin Reed had presented her data to the Concordance Subcommittee on Safety. It was dismissed without review. The Silicim are masters of their craft, the Ethel Prater had transmitted, the tone conveying a parent comforting a child who fears a monster under the bed. Human anxiety is not a variable in our calculations. The carving continued. The monument began to take shape. A spire of impossible geometry that would stab 50 kilometers into Triton's thin atmosphere. On Earth, the children learned about it in their lessons, a symbol of our bright future under the Concordance's loving gaze. They were taught to feel pride. Alara Vance felt only a cold, creeping dread. The insult became an injury on the 97th day of the carving. It wasn't a sudden cataclysm, no brilliant explosion or flash of light. It was a sound, a single, deep, resonant tone that echoed through the entire Sol system. It was the sound of the tuning fork striking the glass mountain. On Io, Ilara's sensors screamed into the red. The needles on her analog gauge's relics she trusted more than any digital display snapping behind their glass casings. The gravitational wave that erupted from Neptune's core was unlike anything she had ever modeled. It wasn't a wave of destruction, not a blast of energy. It was a wave of wrongness. It moved at the speed of light, a silent, invisible tsunami that subtly warped the fabric of space-time itself. The Concordance patrol ships in the outer system were the first to report anomalies. Their navigation systems were off by meters, then kilometers. Their perfect ethel drives sputtered, unable to reconcile the reality of space with the maps in their memory. On Earth, the effects were more insidious. The first to notice were the artists and the poets, the sensitives who spoke of a sudden, profound sense of vertigo, a feeling that the world was tilted on its axis. Then the physicists and engineers began to see it. Atomic clocks, the bedrock of human civilization, began to drift out of sync. A few nanoseconds at first, then more. The global positioning system became a lottery. Satellites wobbled in their orbits, their trajectories subtly but irrevocably altered. The Concordance assured everyone it was a temporary solar phenomenon, a magnetic fluctuation they had under control. They lied. Alara knew they were lying. She tracked the wave as it propagated inward, a ripple of cosmic dislocation. It washed over Jupiter, exciting its magnetic field into a frenzy that bathed Io in a lethal bath of radiation, forcing her to abandon her observatory and retreat to a shielded bunker deep in the moon's crust. And it passed Saturn, its ring shimmering with an unholy light as the orbits of 1 billion ice particles were nudged into chaos. The wave was coming for Earth. Kaylin Reed demanded an audience. This time, he was not met with amused pity. He was met with a wall of bureaucratic silence. His requests were rerouted, his credentials questioned. The Ethel Prater was in meditation. The Silicim were in consultation. The Concordance was investigating. They assured him. Finally, a junior aide, a nervous, multi-limbed creature from a species that communicated through scented vapor, gave him the unofficial truth. It was an accident. The Silicim had miscalculated. The resonance event was unfortunate but contained. There would be minor, lingering gravitational distortions, but nothing life-threatening. The Concordance would dispatch a team of stabilizers to correct the imbalances in due course. It was an apology wrapped in jargon and delivered with the emotional weight of a corporate press release. Kaylin knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were lying about the danger, too. The Concordance did not make mistakes, and if they did not admit to them. They buried them, deep in her bunker on Io, surrounded by the hum of life support and the ghostly glow of her monitors. Alara Vance found the truth. It was buried in the energy signature of the initial event, a ghost in the machine that the concordance sensors had missed. The resonance wave wasn't a side effect of the drilling. It was the drilling. The monument was a lie, a cover for something else entirely. The Silicim, under the secret sanction of the Ethel, were testing a new form of energy extraction, attempting to tap the rotational energy of Neptune itself by using Triton as a massive resonance capacitor. They were trying to bleed a gas giant dry. The monument was just the housing for their machine. It had failed. The energy they had tried to siphon had backfired, destabilizing Neptune's gravitational core and unleashing the wave. They had gambled with the solar system and lost. But there was something worse. The wave wasn't just a passing ripple. Her models, run on every quantum processor she could still access, all came to the same horrifying conclusion. The wave had a feedback loop. As it passed through a celestial body with a significant gravity well, like a planet, it amplified, its resonant frequency tightening. It would wash over Earth, and in doing so, it would be imprinted with Earth's own gravitational signature. Then it would hit the sun. When the amplified, Earth-imprinted wave struck the star, it would create a resonance cascade in the sun's chromosphere. The result would be a focused, coherent solar flare, a spear of incandescent plasma aimed with impossible precision directly back at the point of origin Earth. It wouldn't just be a flare, it would be an execution, a stellar-scale cauterization of a crime scene. The planet wouldn't be destroyed, but its surface would be sterilized, its atmosphere boiled away, its oceans turned to steam. The Concordance wasn't sending stabilizers. They were waiting for the evidence of their recklessness to be erased. The silence wasn't just an insult anymore. It was a death sentence. Alara had to get the word out. The Concordance had locked down all official channels, citing solar interference as the cause. Her own back channels were being systematically shut down. She had one last desperate option, a tight-beam neutrino broadcaster, an obsolete piece of tech she'd salvaged from a derelict prospector ship. It was slow, it was noisy, and its signal was like shouting into a hurricane, but it was virtually untraceable. She began coding her message, pouring all her data, her model, her proof of the Ethel's murderous negligence into a compressed data packet. She addressed it to the only person she knew who might have the courage and the fury to do something with it: Marcus Thorne, a disgraced former colonel of the Earth Defense Force. Thorne was a relic from the pre-concordance era, a man who believed humanity's greatest weapon was its own stubborn refusal to die. He'd been forcibly retired after calling the Concordance Treaty a gilded surrender. He was living in obscurity somewhere in the asteroid belt, a pariah nursing a grudge. Alara didn't know if he was still alive, or if he'd even received the message, but she had to try. As she prepared the final sequence for transmission, an alarm blared through her bunker, a proximity alert. She pulled up the external sensors. A single ship was descending through Io's sulphurous yellow clouds. It was sleek, dark, and utterly silent. Not a concordance design. It bore the unmistakable angular, brutalist lines of an old EDF gunship. It landed 100 meters from her bunker's hidden entrance, its landing struts sinking into the sulphurous dust. Her comms crackled to life for the first time in days. A voice, gravelly and laced with static, cut through the silence. "Dr. Vance, you're a hard woman to find. I got your message." It wasn't Marcus Thorne. The voice was younger, sharper. "The old man is gone. My name is Jax Thorne. Marcus was my father. He told me if the world ever went to hell, I should look for the woman who tried to warn everyone first. The airlock to her bunker hissed open. A figure stood silhouetted against the toxic daylight of Io, clad in a worn pressure suit, a pulse rifle held loosely at his side. He also taught me that you don't reason with a predator that's decided your prey. My father was a soldier. I'm just a scavenger. But I think you and I have something to talk about. You have the why. I've been collecting the how. Jack stepped inside, his helmet retracting to reveal a face that was all sharp angles and cold fury, his eyes holding the glint of a man who had been waiting his entire life for a war he'd been told was over. Alara looked from the man to her screen, where the simulation showed a spear of solar fire engulfing a blue-green world. The final insult was coming, and humanity, she realized with a dawning, terrible clarity, was about to answer. Jack's thorn moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a life lived in tight spaces and dangerous situations. He stripped off his pressure suit, revealing a lean frame clad in the dark, oil-stained fatigues of a deep space scavenger. Beneath the grime, Alara could see the faint lines of old EDF insignia on his sleeves, a legacy worn like a faded tattoo. He accepted the nutrient paste packet she offered without a word, his eyes scanning every console, every diagnostic screen in her cramped bunker, absorbing the reality of her work and her warning. My father spent his last 20 years building a network, Jax began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to soak up the sterile hum of the life support. He called it the Echo Network. He said that if you shout into a canyon, the rock doesn't just absorb the sound, it sends a piece of it back. He believed humanity had been shouted down, and he was listening for the echo. He took a long swallow of the paste. He found others, old soldiers who refused to forget, engineers who were retired for asking the wrong questions, freighter captains who saw the Concordance for what it was, a gilded leash. We don't have a fleet. We don't have an army. We have shadows. We have favors. We have scrapyards full of ships the Concordance thinks were melted down into statues of unity. He gestured to her main screen, where the simulation of Earth's fiery demise played on a silent loop. You've given the Echo a reason to shout back. You have the physics, the math, the proof of murder. We have the rust, the anger, and the know-how to turn their garbage into guns. Alara felt a spark ignite in the cold void of her scientific dread, a feeling she hadn't recognized in years' hope. Sharp and dangerous, she brought up her data. Not the simulations, but the raw resonance logs, the subspace distortion charts, the spectral analysis of Neptune's wounded core. She explained it to him not as a theorist, but as a mechanic explaining a broken engine, laying out the precise, interlocking sequence of failures and deceits, the wave's amplification, the imprinting, the feedback loop, the inevitable, targeted solar execution. Jax listened, his expression unreadable. But when she finished, he nodded slowly. So, they didn't just break our solar system, he said, the words ground out like broken glass. They weaponized it against us. They're not just letting us die. They're making our own star pull the trigger. He looked her in the eye, and the cold fury she'd seen before now burned with a white-hot intensity. All right, Doctor, let's go give them a variable they didn't account for. Their journey from Io was a masterclass in subterfuge. Jax's ship, the Vagrant, was an ugly, patched-together marvel of ghost technology. Its hull was a composite of radar-absorbent materials salvaged from a dozen different wrecks. Its heat signature was baffled through a labyrinthine series of vents and coolant sinks designed to mimic the thermal profile of a mid-sized asteroid. Its drive was an old magnetic plasma hybrid, a dirty engine by Concordant standards. Its emission so full of unfiltered particles and chaotic radiation that the Eithel's sophisticated sensors were programmed to dismiss it as cosmic background noise. They didn't fly in straight lines, but in long, parabolic arcs, using the gravity wells of Jupiter and its larger moons to slingshot them into the asteroid belt. A series of calculated falls through space that left no discernible engine trail. For the first time, Alara understood the sheer, suffocating totality of the Concordance's control. Every official flight path was monitored, every standard engine signature logged and tracked. To be free was to be invisible, to live in the margins, to embrace the noise and the chaos that the Ethel had worked so hard to filter out of existence. After 3 days of silent, tense travel, they arrived at a place that did not exist on any chart. It was a hollowed-out C-type asteroid designated only by a string of random numbers, a ghost in a graveyard of cosmic debris. Jax called it the Boneyard. The interior was a cavernous, sprawling testament to human ingenuity and defiance. A small, self-sustaining city clung to the inner walls, powered by a salvaged fission reactor that hummed with a steady, reassuring beat. A makeshift shipyard filled the central void, where the skeletal remains of old Earth Defense Force destroyers were being slowly, lovingly resurrected by teams of engineers crawling over their hulls like ants. This was the heart of the Echo Network. It was here she met the rest of them. There was Lena, the Boneyard's lead engineer, a woman whose face was permanently smudged with grease and whose hands moved with the delicate precision of a surgeon as she rewired the plasma conduits of a decommissioned railgun. She was one of the original designers of the EDF fleet, forcibly retired for antiquated and aggressive design philosophies. There was Kenji, a pilot who had once been the top cadet in the Concordance's Joint Flight Academy, kicked out for insubordinate tendencies after he took an Ethel shuttle on an unauthorized joyride through Saturn's rings. His hands, covered in the silver tracery of a neural interface rig, never seemed to stop moving. And there were dozens more. A quiet, grim-faced community of exiles and outcasts, bound by a shared, unspoken resentment. In the Boneyard's command center, a room cobbled together from the bridges of 3 different salvaged warships, Alara presented her findings. The silence that followed was heavier than the vacuum outside. It was the silence of vindication, of a fear long held, finally given a name and a face. They had all suspected the Concordance's benevolence was a lie, but none had imagined a truth so monstrous. "How long do we have?" Lena asked, her voice raspy from years of breathing recycled air and welding fumes. Alara ran the final projection. The wavefront will reach the inner system in 26 days. Once it passes Earth and hits the sun, the resonance cascade will be instantaneous. The flare will strike Earth approximately 8 minutes later. 26 days to avert the apocalypse. The task seemed impossible. A fool's errand. They couldn't outrun it. There was nowhere to go. They couldn't fight the sun. "No," Alara said, a new idea taking shape in her mind, sparked by the sight of the resurrected warships around her. "We don't fight the sun. We build a shield." She turned to Lena. "Before the Concordance, the EDF was terrified of solar activity. They had contingency plans for a once-in-a-million-years coronal mass ejection, something that could strip the planet's magnetic field. Did any of those plans ever move past the theoretical stage?" Lena's eyes, old and tired, suddenly lit with a fierce, almost forgotten fire. She tapped a series of commands into a dusty archive terminal. After a moment, a schematic flickered onto the main screen. It was a project of breathtaking ambition, a ghost from a past where humanity had looked to the heavens not for saviors, but for threats. Project Aegis. It wasn't a physical barrier, but a planetary-scale electromagnetic field generator, a network of emitters designed to project a layered, self-regenerating magnetic shield capable of deflecting the charged particles of even the most violent solar flare. It was our magnum opus, Lena whispered, her fingers tracing the glowing lines of the diagram. Designed to wrap the entire planet in a second magnetosphere. The power requirements were theoretical. We never fully built it. The Concordance arrived during its initial construction. They ordered the project scrapped, labeled it provocative technology and a waste of resources. Jax leaned forward, his eyes locked on the schematic. They ordered it scrapped. Did you scrap it? Lena. A slow, grim smile spread across the old engineer's face. The Concordance sees what it wants to see. I signed the demolition orders myself. We blew up the construction scaffolding and sent them a very impressive video of the fireworks. The core components, we secured them, powered them down, buried them deep. The plan, insane and desperate, was born in that moment. Project Aegis had two primary components. The first was the emitter array, a series of 20 massive focusing lenses that had been secretly stored in the deep, abandoned mining tunnels beneath the surface of Mercury, where the constant magnetic interference and extreme heat made Concordance sensor sweeps nearly impossible. The second was the control nexus, the command and control center for the entire system, hidden in a stable Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon, disguised as a defunct pre-concordance communication satellite. To reactivate the system, they would need to get teams to both locations simultaneously. They would have to bring the emitters online, route their power, and then activate the shield from the Nexus. But there was a catch. A problem so immense it threatened to make the entire plan moot. Jump-starting the emitter array requires a power surge equivalent to a small star, Lena said, her smile fading. We designed it to be initiated by a direct tap from the planet's core, a tap we never built. We don't have a power source big enough to kick it into life. A heavy silence fell over the room. They had a shield, but no key to turn it on. It was then that Kenji-boy, the pilot sir, spoke up, his gaze fixed on a detail in the Sol system map on the main screen. "What about them?" he asked, pointing to a single, blinking icon orbiting Jupiter. It was designated as Concordance Observer Station K7, an ethel vessel. The Concordance stabilizers that had been sent to monitor the situation. "These ethel ships," Kenji said, his voice barely a whisper. "They don't run on fission or fusion. They use a singularity drive, a contained quantum black hole. The energy output is functionally infinite." Alara saw it instantly. The terrifying, elegant, and utterly suicidal solution. They would have to steal a star. They would have to hijack the Ethel ship, fly it to Mercury, and use its singularity core as the ignition key for Project Aegis. They would have to steal the executioner's own power source to stop the execution. The plan was no longer just desperate. It was an act of open rebellion, a declaration of war. They would have to divide their small force. One team, led by Jax, would take the Vagrant and a small assault crew to capture the Ethel ship. A second team, led by Lena, would take a repurposed mining frigate to Mercury to prep the emitter array for the power surge. A third, with Kenji at the helm, would take a small stealth ship to the Lagrange point to reactivate the control nexus. All three teams would have to move in perfect sync, under a complete communications blackout, hunted by an enemy that held all the cards. They were no longer just echoes. They were the first peal of thunder in a storm of their own making. In the hangar bay of the Boneyard, as the crews boarded their ships, A new symbol was hastily painted over the faded EDF logos, a stylized image of a star, a spear of fire emerging from it, and a single, defiant hand raised to block the blast. There were no grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. There was only the quiet clang of metal on metal, the hiss of sealed airlocks, and the grim set of jaws. Alara stood with Jax on the bridge of the Vagrant as it slipped out of the Boneyard's asteroid shell as in her personal data pad. The countdown clock ticked relentlessly downward. 26 days. She looked out at the vast, indifferent darkness. At the distant, placid glow of the star that was meant to be their grave. And for the first time in a century, she felt the pure, unadulterated fire of human rage. It was time to remind the galaxy that a cage, no matter how gilded, is still a cage, and that some creatures will not go quietly into the night. They will chew through the bars. The silent separation of their 3 small ships was a profound act of faith, a fracturing of their nascent rebellion into 3 desperate, lonely gambles. Aboard the Vagrant, Alara watched the icons for Lena's frigate, the Grit, and Kenji's stealth ship, the Whisper, blink once on the tactical display and then vanish as they initiated their divergent, calm, silent trajectories. The vast, black canvas of the solar system suddenly felt less like an empty space and more like a hunting ground, and they had just willingly scattered. Their only reunion point was a shield that did not yet exist, powered by a star they had not yet stolen, against a deadline measured in the steady, indifferent march of a wave of space-time distortion. There was no room for error. An error by one meant annihilation for all. Lena's journey aboard the Grit was a brutal descent into hell. Mercury, the forgotten, kiln-hot rock of the inner system, was a place the Concordance simply ignored. It was too hostile, its resources too common to be of interest. This neglect, once a sign of contempt, was now their greatest asset. The repurposed mining frigate groaned under the strain as it entered low orbit, its hull plates glowing a dull cherry red from the sun's unyielding glare. They landed in the perpetual twilight of a deep polar crater, the only place on the surface where a human could survive for more than a few seconds. The entrance to the abandoned EDF mining complex was exactly where Lena's 30-year-old memory had placed it. A blast door disguised as a sheer rock face. Inside, the air was stale and thin, but breathable. The emergency power, a series of geothermal taps, still hummed with life. Her team of old guard engineers, men and women with silver hair and hands calloused from decades of working with stubborn machinery, moved with a quiet, grim purpose. They found the emitter array in the deepest cavern, a series of 20 colossal rings of polished, exotic alloys, each the size of a city block, resting in their cradles like sleeping gods. They were magnificent, and they were damaged. A seismic event. Years ago, it had fractured the cavern's ceiling. A rock slide had crushed 2 of the primary power conduits and, worse, had knocked one of the emitter rings from its gyroscopic mounting. It lay tilted at a precarious angle, its delicate focusing crystals misaligned by a critical 2.7 degrees. The simulations never accounted for geology, Lena muttered, her voice tight with a frustration that bordered on despair. The physical repairs would take days of backbreaking work with plasma cutters and heavy lifting equipment. The recalibration of the focusing crystals, however, was a nightmare. It required a level of computational power they simply didn't have on site. She had the knowledge in her head, but she would have to manually interface with the emitter's core programming, a task akin to performing brain surgery with a wrench. Her timeline, once tight, was now screaming in her face. Every hour they spent in this cavern was an hour Jax and Kenji didn't have. Miles away, in the cold, gravitational equilibrium of the Earth-Moon L1 point, Kenji fought a battle of silence in shadows. The control nexus, the satellite that was the brain of Project Aegis, floated before his ship. The Whisper, exactly as the archives described a relic of early space exploration, all clunky solar panels and whip-like antennae. But as he drew closer, his passive sensors picked up something that wasn't in the schematics. A small, sleek, crystalline pod was clamped to the satellite's main body like a silver parasite. It was a Concordance long-range monitor, a silent, sleepless sentinel. It wasn't actively transmitting, but its quantum entanglement comms meant that any attempt to tamper with it, any sudden energy spike from reactivating the satellite, would instantly alert the nearest Concordance patrol. "They put a bug on our ghost," his co-pilot whispered, her voice barely audible over the ship's life support. A direct assault was out of the question. They had to perform an EVA, a spacewalk to manually disconnect the monitor before they could even think about powering up the Nexus. Kenji and his co-pilot, a young woman named Anya who specialized in demolitions, suited up. The void outside was absolute. The sun was a blinding diamond to their left, the earth a swirling blue and white marble to their right. It was a beautiful, aerifying stage for their delicate work. They moved with agonizing slowness, their magnetic boots clinging to the satellite's hull. As Anya reached for the monitor's power coupling with a cryo cutter, Kenji's suit proximity alarm shrieked. A cloud of micrometeoroids, no larger than grains of sand but traveling at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, was sweeping through their position. They had seconds to react, pressing themselves flat against the satellite's body as the invisible hailstorm passed. The sounds of impacts like sharp, angry taps against their helmets. The storm passed, but the monitor's status light, once a steady blue, was now pulsing a soft, inquisitive amber. Had the impacts triggered a diagnostic? Were they already discovered? They didn't know. They had no choice but to continue, their every movement now shadowed by the terrible uncertainty of that pulsing light. The greatest gamble was unfolding in the shadow of Jupiter. Jax and Delara stood on the bridge of the Vagrant, watching the Ethel Observer Station K7 resolve from a point of light into a thing of impossible grace. It wasn't a ship in the human sense. It was a flowing, sculptural form of pearlescent material that seemed to drink the faint light of the distant sun. It radiated a serene, untouchable authority. "There are no weapon ports, no tactical hard points," Alara confirmed, her voice tense as she monitored the data stream from her long-range sensors. "Its defenses are passive, energy shields, sensor nets. It's designed to be inviolable, not aggressive." That arrogance was the weakness they had to exploit. Their plan was to be a gnat flying into the face of a god. The Vagrant began its final approach, venting plasma and tumbling erratically, perfectly mimicking a derelict freighter caught in Jupiter's gravity. "They're painting us with their sensors," the Vagrant's pilot announced, his knuckles white on the controls. "Confirming low-level scan. They've identified us as inanimate debris. Course deviation logged. They're not concerned." Jax took a deep breath. "Launch the pod." From a hidden bay in the Vagrant's belly, a small, ugly canister of metal and ceramic plating was ejected. It wasn't a torpedo, it was a Trojan horse. It hurtled toward K7, shielded from sensors by its crude, non-reactive shell. Inside, Jax and a team of 5 heavily armed scavengers were strapped into their seats, the silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing. Alara's voice crackled in his helmet, a lifeline of pure data. Impact in 30 seconds. The entry point is a tertiary exhaust conduit for the atmospheric recycler. It's a structural weak point. They won't have it shielded internally. The impact was a jarring, violent clang of metal on metal. For a moment, siren blared inside the Ethel ship, a melodic, alien chime of alarm. Before it was cut short, Jax's team was already cutting through the conduit wall with a thermal lance. The interior of the Ethel ship was a disorienting blend of temple and machine. The corridors were wide, curving tunnels of softly glowing material. The air smelled of ozone and something vaguely floral. There were no crew, not in the human sense. As they moved deeper, they encountered the Ethel. They were beings of coherent light, humanoid in shape but without fixed features, their forms shimmering like captured auroras. They didn't attack, they simply observed. And as they observed, a low, resonant hum began to build, a psychic pressure that made the team's heads ache and their vision swim. Doubt, fear, and confusion began to cloud their minds. One of Jax's team stopped, his rifle lowering as he stared in awe at one of the beings. "They're beautiful," he stammered. "Get him moving," Jax roared, firing a stun bolt into the ceiling. The crack of the discharge broke the psychic spell. "They're trying to get in your head. Keep moving." Alara, back on the Vagrant, fought her own battle. She was their guide, their eyes and ears, desperately hacking the Ethel ship systems, fighting against an alien logic that was more art than science. She had to isolate the singularity drive, section it off from the ship's main control before the Ethel could simply shut it down or, worse, destabilize it. "I'm in," she transmitted, her voice strained. "But it's like their systems are alive. They're adapting. I can't hold them off for long." Jax and his team stormed the bridge, a vast, spherical chamber where a single, massive Ethel Praetor hovered, its light pulsating with a deep, sorrowful rhythm. A voice entered their minds, not of words, but of pure meaning. "This is a vessel of knowledge. Your violence is a contamination. Why do you embrace your own extinction?" "We're not embracing it," Jax growled, raising his rifle. "We're refusing it. This ship is ours now." The Praetor's light flared, and a wave of pure sonic force knocked the team from their feet. But as it prepared a second blast, Alara's hack broke through. The ambient light in the chamber flickered and died. The sonic hum cut out. "Bridge is isolated," she shouted over the comm. "The drive is yours, Jax." They had the ship. As his team secured the disoriented, now powerless Ethel, Jax stood on the silent bridge, looking out at the swirling clouds of Jupiter. They had done the impossible. But as Alara worked to transfer full control of the singularity drive to a terminal they had brought with them, a new alert flashed on her console. "Jax, they sent a message," she said, her voice dropping. "Before I cut them off. It wasn't a standard distress call. It was a quantum entangled burst, aimed at Cygnus X1, at the Concordance High Command." The serenity of their victory evaporated, replaced by a cold, stark reality. The gnat had not only flown into the face of the god, it had bitten it. The lie was over. The Concordance knew. The clock was still ticking down to Earth's destruction, but now a second clock had started, counting down to the arrival of the Concordance's wrath. They were no longer just rebels hiding in the shadows. They were pirates, fugitives, and the declared enemies of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. The captured Ethel ship, renamed the Unforgiven by a grimly ironic Jax, was a stolen ghost gliding through the solar system. Elara, working feverishly on the bridge, had managed to slave the ship's singularity drive to a human interfaced control system, a crude but functional bypass that allowed their pilot to steer the vessel. Yet, the ship itself felt like a violated sanctuary. The captive Ethel hovered silently in the main chamber, their light dimmed to a soft, mournful glow, their psychic emanations a constant, low thrum of sorrow and disbelief. They were not prisoners in a conventional sense, they were witnesses, forced to watch as their vessel of peace was repurposed into a tool of desperate, violent hope. Their silent judgment was a heavy weight on the crew. Their journey to Mercury was a race against two inexorable forces, the approaching gravitational wave and the inevitable concordance response. Alara's projections were stark. The quantum-entangled message would have reached concordance high command almost instantaneously. A fleet would be dispatched. Given their location at Cygnus X1, even with their advanced FTL drives, the fastest response would take at least 10 days to reach the Sol system. It was a 10-day window of opportunity, a sliver of time bought by cosmic distances. But their own timeline was even tighter. They had only 6 days left before the wave reached Earth. The margin for error had evaporated. They were now operating in the red, where a single delay would mean catastrophic failure. They arrived at Mercury to a scene of controlled chaos. Lena's voice, strained and exhausted, came over the comm for the first time in days. A brief, encrypted burst. "We have a problem. Emitter 7 is offline. The mounting is damaged beyond immediate repair. I can bypass it, but it will create a hole in the shield. A weak point directly over the Pacific sector. A hole, a single gap in their planetary defense, precisely where the solar flare would be at its most intense. We're out of time, Lena." Jax's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "A shield with a hole is better than no shield at all. Can you handle the power surge?" Lena's reply was a string of technical specifications, but her underlying message was clear: if they could deliver the power, she would be ready. The maneuver that followed was the most dangerous piece of piloting in human history. They had to bring the Unforgiven into a low, stationary orbit over the polar crater, positioning the ship's primary energy conduit, the source of its singularity drive, directly over the emitter array's main power input. It was a celestial scale act of plugging a cord into a socket, with a contained black hole on one end and a planetary defense system on the other. As the Unforgiven descended, Mercury's weak magnetic field fought against the Singularity's immense gravitational pull, causing the ship to shudder violently. Alarms, both human and ethel, screamed through the bridge. On the surface, Lena and her team watched as the pearlescent ethel ship filled their sky, a terrifying, beautiful omen. "We are in position," the pilot grunted, his face beaded with sweat. "Channel is open. Lena, it's all yours." "Initiating power transfer." Lena's voice crackled. Down in the cavern, she slammed a heavy, archaic lever, and the effect was instantaneous. A colossal beam of pure, white-hot energy, a torrent of raw quantum power, erupted from the belly of the Unforgiven and struck the central hub of the emitter array. The ancient machinery, dormant for decades, roared to life. The 19 functional emitter rings began to spin, their surfaces glowing with a fierce blue light. The hum of power vibrated through the very rock of the planet, a deep, resonant chord of awakening. On the bridge of the Unforgiven, The lights flickered, and the Singularity Core's containment field fluctuated wildly. "The power draw is destabilizing us," the pilot yelled. "I can't hold this orbit for long," but the transfer was working. On Lena's console, 19 of the 20 emitters showed green. One remained a stark, defiant red. Meanwhile, at the L1 Lagrange point, Kenji and Anya had made their decision. The pulsing amber light on the concordance monitor had not stopped. They were out of time. They couldn't risk a diagnostic pulse alerting a patrol. "We go loud," Kenji said, his voice calm. "Anya, plant the charge. We're going to blow the bug and power up the Nexus in the same second. The energy spike from the activation should mask the explosion from any long-range sensors." It was a wild gamble. Anya placed a small, shaped charge at the base of the concordance monitor, while Kenji worked on the satellite's main power console, his neurally linked fingers flying across the controls. "Charge is set," Anya confirmed, moving to a safe distance. "On your mark." Kenji took a deep breath. 3, 2, 1, mark. And equivalent. Brilliant flash of light erupted from the satellite as Anya's charge detonated, vaporizing the concordance monitor. In the exact same instant, Kenji threw the final switch, and the Aegis control nexus, the brain of the shield, came to life. The old satellite's solar panels retracted, and a new, more powerful internal reactor hummed into existence. On his screen, a schematic of Earth appeared, with 19 green lines extending from Mercury, forming an incomplete web around the planet. A single wide, gaping hole remained. He had control. Back at Mercury, the power transfer was complete. The Unforgiven pulled away from the planet, its singularity core slowly restabilizing. "We did it," Jax breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. But it was short-lived. Alara's face was pale. "Jax, new sensor readings. They're here." On the main view screen, the fabric of space near the orbit of Venus seemed to tear open. 3 rifts of shimmering, distorted light appeared, and from them emerged 3 concordance warships. They weren't the graceful, sculpted vessels of the Ethel. These were ships of the Zelen Consortium, the Concordance's enforcers vast, crystalline dreadnoughts that bristled with energy cannons. They were brutal, efficient, and they had arrived 4 days ahead of schedule. "They must have had a patrol fleet in the inner systems," Alara whispered in horror. "They didn't come from Cygnus. They were already here." The lead Zelen dreadnought fired a warning shot, a lance of pure particle energy that sliced through the void, missing the Unforgiven by a scant kilometer, but close enough to make the ship's shield scream. A transmission came through, cold and precise, bypassing all encryption. "You are in command of a stolen concordance vessel. You have engaged in acts of terrorism and piracy. Surrender the vessel and your crew for judgment. You have 1 cycle. 1 cycle." The Zelen didn't negotiate. "They're hailing us," Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Answer it." A holographic image of a Zelen chancellor appeared on the bridge. It was a towering, multifaceted crystalline being, its voice a chorus of chimes that translated into perfect, condescending English. "You have committed a grave error. Primitives! The vessel you have stolen is an instrument of peace. Your aggression will be met with the correction." Jack stepped in front of the projector, his face a mask of cold fury. "And your recklessness will be met with consequences," he snarled. "You gambled with our world. You lost. Now you get to watch us save ourselves." He cut the transmission. The space between Mercury and Venus became a battlefield. The Zelen ships advanced, firing precise volleys of energy. The Unforgiven, despite its lethal design, was not a warship. Its shields were strong, but they buckled under the sustained assault. Jax knew they couldn't win a direct fight. They couldn't run. They could only buy time. "Kenji, are you ready?" he yelled into the comm. "The Nexus is online." Kenji's voice shot back, steady despite the static. "I can see the zone. I'm ready to raise the shield on your command." "Lena status. The emitters are charged and aligned. Just say the word, son." Jax looked at Alara. "How much time until the wave hits?" Her fingers flew across her console. 1 hour. 12 minutes. The Zelen know this. They're not trying to destroy us. They're trying to delay us. They want the flare to do their dirty work. It was a race to the bitter end. Jax ordered the pilot to take them into Mercury's thin atmosphere, using the planet's curve as a shield against the worst of the Zelen's bombardment. The Unforgiven skimmed the cratered, scorched surface, its shields shedding energy as stray shots impacted the ground around them, throwing up plumes of red dust. "They're trying to box us in," the pilot grunted, wrestling with the controls. "They're forcing us away from the emitters. It's time," Jack said, his decision made. "Kenji, now raise the shield." "Copy that." Kenji replied. "Aegis is going live across the solar system." From the command nexus at L1, a command signal shot to Mercury. 19 beams of pure magnetic force erupted from the surface of the planet, lancing out into space. They curved around the Earth, weaving together to form a shimmering, translucent cage of blue light, a second magnetosphere, a shield of pure human defiance. It was beautiful, it was magnificent, and it was incomplete. A vast, terrifying hole remained over the Pacific Ocean. The Zeln fleet paused, their sensors analyzing the impossible sight of a primitive species erecting a planetary defense shield in a matter of days. Their pause gave Jax the opening he needed. "Alara, can you give me a focused burst from the Singularity Drive? Not a beam, a wave, a gravitational pulse, something to knock them off balance." Alara's eyes widened. "It would vent half our remaining power and could collapse the containment field." "Just do it!" Jax roared. Alara rerouted the power, her hands a blur. A wave of pure gravitational distortion, a miniature echo of the very wave they were fighting, erupted from the Unforgiven. The 3 Zelen dreadnoughts were tossed like toys, their shields flickering, their precise formations broken. It was the opening they needed. The Unforgiven shot out from behind Mercury, not towards the safety of deep space, but directly towards the Zeln fleet, a single, desperate charge. The final hour had begun. The universe held its breath in the momentary chaos of the gravitational wave. The Zeln dreadnoughts, masterpieces of crystalline stability, tumbled like thrown stones, their internal systems screaming to correct their orientation. It was a reprieve measured in seconds, and Jack seized it. "This isn't a fight," he barked, his voice cutting through the alarms on the bridge. "It's a breakout. Get us to Earth. Now." The pilot didn't need to be told twice. He pushed the ethel drive to its limits, and the Unforgiven surged forward, a streak of Solan light leaving the confused Zelen fleet in its wake. Their destination was no longer a place of safety, but the epicenter of the crisis, the precise point in space where their world was scheduled to die. The chase was a desperate, searing sprint across millions of kilometers of void. The Zelen recovered with terrifying speed, their logic-driven minds processing the anomaly and correcting their course. Long-range particle beams, lances of pure energy, began to stitch the darkness around the Unforgiven. The ship's shields, already weakened, flickered and groaned under the assault. An impact against the aft section sent a violent shudder through the deck plates, and the lights on the bridge dimmed ominously. "They're hurting us," Alara stated, her eyes locked on the tactical display. "They're not trying for a kill shot. They're trying to cripple our drive, to slow us down until the flare arrives." It was a cruel, efficient strategy. They didn't need to destroy the rebels. They only needed them to be a second too late. It was during this frantic chase, with the star of their own system glowing with impending doom on the view screen, that Alara Vance found the final, terrible equation. Her mind, fueled by adrenaline and a lifetime of theoretical work, saw the solution not in victory, but in sacrifice. "Jax," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the chaos. "The hole in the shield. I can close it." He turned to her, his face a grim mask. "How?" She pointed to the Singularity Drive's containment field status on her console. "We can't patch the shield from the outside, but we can put something in the way. Something with a gravitational field strong enough to bend the plasma flare around the planet." Jax's eyes followed her gaze to the console, and the horrifying implication dawned on him. "The drive," he whispered. "If we overload the containment field," Alara explained, her voice steady despite the monumental weight of her words. "The singularity won't explode in the conventional sense. For a fraction of a second, as it collapses, it will release a wave of pure, focused gravity. It will create a temporary, impenetrable wall of warped space-time. It would be more than a shield. It would be a dam. It would absorb the core of the flare." The unspoken part of her plan hung in the air between them, the ship, and everyone on it would be at the heart of that collapse. It was a one-way trip. Their ship would become the final patch on the shield, a sacrifice to fill the gap left by their own limitations. Jax looked at the faces of his crew on the bridge, the hardened scavengers who had followed him into the heart of the storm. He saw no fear, only a resolute, bone-deep weariness and a flicker of defiant pride. He keyed the comm, opening a channel to the scattered remnants of the Echo network. "Lena, Kenji, Alara has a solution for the whole." He relayed the plan, his voice cold and even, a commander giving his final order. From Mercury. Lena's voice was thick with emotion, but her words were firm. "We'll hold the emitter steady. Godspeed, Jax." From the L1 Nexus, Kenji simply said, "We'll keep the lights on for you. Make it count." They reached Earth's orbit with the Zeln fleet hot on their heels. The planet hung before them, a beautiful, vulnerable swirl of blue and white, encased in the shimmering, incomplete cage of Project Aegis. It was the most beautiful thing Alara had ever seen. On her sensor screen, a new alert flashed, a wave of energy unlike any other. "It's happening," she said, her voice a near whisper. "The wave has hit the sun." Across 93 million miles, the resonance cascade began. On the surface of the sun, a filament of plasma larger than the Earth itself lifted, twisted, and erupted. A spear of stellar fury hurled with divine precision across the system. It would take 8 minutes to arrive, 8 minutes to live or die. "Position us in the gap," Jax ordered. The pilot guided the wounded Unforgiven into the gaping hole in the Aegis shield, turning the ship to face the oncoming solar wind. The Zeln dreadnoughts, realizing their strategy of delay had failed, began their final, a brutal assault, pouring all their firepower onto the lone, stationary vessel. "Alara," Jax said, turning to her. "It's time." She nodded, her fingers moving across her console, initiating the final sequence. Containment field overload initiated. The collapse will occur in 90 seconds. Jax walked to the bridge's main comms panel and opened a system-wide broadcast, aimed at no one and everyone. A final message in a bottle thrown into a cosmic ocean. "This is Jax Thorne of the Earth ship Unforgiven." His voice boomed across the solar system, a ghost on the comm waves. "Let the record show that the Galactic Concordance, in an act of criminal negligence, destabilized our star and condemned our world to death to hide their failure. We were silenced, we were dismissed, and we were sentenced to burn. But humanity does not go quietly." The flare was visible now, a blindingly brilliant wave of incandescent light, a tidal wave of fire crossing the void. The shields of the Unforgiven finally collapsed under the Zeln assault. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The hull groaned, threatening to tear itself apart. 60 seconds. Alara counted down, her hand held over the final activation key. Jax looked out at the approaching wall of death, a strange calm settling over him. He thought of his father, of the long years spent listening for an echo. "We are the species that looks into the abyss and builds a bridge," he broadcasted, his voice ringing with a terrible, clear-eyed pride. "We are the children of a world that has tried to kill us 1,000 times, and we are still here. You did not account for our rage. You did not account for our stubbornness, and you did not account for our hope." 30 seconds. The Zeln particle beams began to slice into the ship's hull. "Let every world that hears this know," Jax's voice rose to a roar, "that on this day, humanity refused to be erased." 10 seconds, Alara said, her eyes meeting Jax's one last time. He gave her a single, sharp nod. She slammed her hand down on the key. The singularity core breached. For an instant, there was a profound, impossible silence. All sound, all light, all energy on the bridge was drawn inward. Then, the universe broke. A silent, spherical explosion of pure white light erupted from the Unforgiven, a new star born in Earth's orbit. The collapsing singularity's gravitational wave hit the oncoming solar flare like a hammer striking an anvil. The spear of fire shattered against the wall of warped space-time, its energy absorbed and deflected, washing harmlessly over the glowing blue lines of the Aegis shield. The Zellan dreadnoughts, caught too close to the event, were crippled. Their crystalline hulls, fractured by the gravitational shear, sent tumbling dead into the black. On Mercury, Lena watched a star die in a world live. At L1, Kenji saw the flare on his monitors break apart like surf on a rocky shore. On Earth, billions of people looked up to see a second sun bloom in their sky. A light so bright it turned night to day for a breathless moment before fading, leaving behind only the faint, protective shimmer of a shield they did not understand. The war was not over. The Concordance was exposed, its authority shattered. 100 worlds, hearing Jax's final message, began to question, to whisper, to plan. The silence had been broken, replaced by the first rumblings of a galactic storm. Humanity had survived. They had paid an unspeakable price, trading their fiercest warriors and their greatest prize for the simple, stubborn right to exist. They had lost their vengeful sons and daughters, but they had saved their home across the galaxy. A new story was told not of a backwater species, but of the people who, when the universe tried to write them out of history, seized the pen and wrote an ending of their own, in fire and sacrifice and a rage that would echo forever among the stars.